to the second episode of Books I Have Skimmed, Chap-Books of the 18th Century. If you haven't watched the first episode, then, I don't know. Hang on. Where have we seen this illustration of a man before a king before? Hang on. It's somewhere... Aha! Oh dear, Old Money Churchyard, Bow Lane, London. I do believe you've been caught in the act. Let's flip through the assorted histories until we find something juicier. Because I'm not an absolute hack, I'm not going to bore you with tepid observations that people in the past were just like people today, but I do think it's pretty cool that these 300-year-old superhero comics sort of illustrate that. Now, the one I want to focus on out of all of these is the famous history of Tom Thumb, wherein is declared his marvellous acts of manhood, full of wonder and merriment, part the first. Because this is written in verse that takes some wonderful turns of phrase. Let's just dip into this here, there and everywhere. So, in Arthur's court Tom Thumb did live, a man of mickle might, who was the best of the Table Round, and eke a worthy knight. In stature but an inch in height, or quarter of a span, how think you that this valiant knight was proved a valiant man? His father was a ploughman plain, his mother milked the cow, and yet the way to get a son this couple knew not how. Until the time the good old man to learned Merlin goes, and there to him in deep distress in secret manner shows how in his heart he wished to have a child in time to come, to be his heir, though it might be no bigger than his thumb. Of this old Merlin then foretold how he his wish should have, and so a son of stature small this charmer to him gav. Well, alright. And so Tom Thumb lives a life of adventure, being swallowed by cows, carried off by birds. In the words of John Ashton, Tom, like most small men, was rather self-assertive. But eventually, these exertions take their toll on him and he dies. He being both slender and tall, the cunning doctors took a fine perspective glass through which they took a careful look into his sickly body down, and therein saw that death stood ready in his wasted guts to take away his breath. But to a being so wonderful, ordinary death was a mere nothing. The fairy queen she loved him so, as you shall understand, that once again she let him go down to the fairyland. The very time that he returned unto the court again, it was, as we are well informed, in good King Arthur's reign, when in the presence of the king he many wonders wrought, recited in the second part, which now is to be bought in Bow Churchyard, where is sold diverting histories many, and pleasant tales as e'er were told for purchase of 1 penny. Excellent little post-credit scene advertising there, Aldermany Churchyard, Bow Lane, London. Your woodcut recycling sins have been forgiven. Tom lives an exciting second life, full of adventure once more, until he's killed by a cat mistaking him for a mouse. The third part opens with the Fairy Queen again dispatching Tom to Earth, and also, as before, his advent is unpropitious. No, I don't know what propitious means either. When he descended through the air, this poor unhappy man, by sad mishap as you shall hear, fell in a close stool pan. This must be that broad humour John Ashton was disparaging in the introduction. Now he has some further adventures in the court of a now aging King Arthur, but, as Ashton says, while failing to keep anything resembling a neutral tone, but the morals of this ungrateful little wretch had evidently grown lax during his stay in Fairyland, and he forgot all about his obligations to his benefactor, for his desires were lustful grown against her majesty, finding of her one day all alone, which proved his tragedy. The queen was naturally furious, that nothing would her wrath appease to free her from all strife, or set her mind at perfect ease until she had his life. Tom hid himself and tried to escape on the back of a butterfly, but the insect flew back into the palace and Tom was captured. He was duly tried and found guilty. So the king his sentence declared, how hanged he should be, that a gibbet should be reared and none should set him free. After his sentence thus was passed, unto a prison he was led, for in a mousetrap he was fast, he had no other bed. Once again a cat mistaking him for a mouse attacks him, but Tom manages to escape this time, but falls into a spider's web, where the blood out of his body drains, he yielded up his breath, thus he was freed from all his pains by his unlooked-for death. Thus sadly ended the favourite of immortals and kings, but from the fact we hear no more from his going to Fairyland, it is probable that his immoral conduct could not be condoned by the good people. I thought I'd look up the original text of this to see if what Tom Thumb does to anger the Queen is something, I don't know, maybe just funny and too rude for Ashton to have published with his Victorian sensibilities, but unfortunately no, it's just kind of sad and sinister. Tom tries to creep up on the Queen while she's asleep with lascivious intent, but she wakes up and spots him before he can do anything. He tries to laugh it off, but no, fuck you, Tom Thumb. You are the hero in your final act where you're undone by your own act of hubris. You stick around and you take your punishment so the public can learn a lesson from you. Incidentally, if anyone from the Marvel Extended Universe writing team is listening to this, that's what hero stories do. They end. They end. Anyway, on to the next thing. Now, I think the history of the Valliant London Prentice is a good example of what a lot of the stories in here are like, but more importantly, it's quite short, so I think I can get through this without boring you to death. And following the grand tradition of Aldermany Churchyard, Bow Lane, London, I will be recycling some woodcut images from elsewhere in this book to illustrate the story for you. Okay, let's give it a go. A youth named Aurelius was the son of wealthy parents in the county of Chester, and being of singular beauty, caused a flutter in all the feminine hearts in his neighbourhood. One young lady, named Dorinda, even going so far as to write him a most unmaidenlike love letter, which, being dropped by accident, was found by one of the young lady's lovers, who, taking counsel with 3 others, set upon Aurelius as he was going through a wood. It is needless to say that he speedily overcame them, but his parents, fearing revenge and wishing to remove him from the wiles of Dorinda, sent him to London and bound him apprentice to a turkey merchant on London Bridge. Here, the young gentleman, after some time, must needs fall in love with his master's daughter, but unlike the usual course of events in such cases, his passion was not reciprocated, so in dudgeon he applied for and obtained the merchant's leave to go to Turkey as his factor. He set out with a gallant equipage, and was well received by the English merchants in Turkey. Merchants in that time do not seem to have been of the same prosaic class as they are now, for on the occasion of a tournament held in honour of a marriage, Aurelius must go fully armed in order to take part in the joust. His blood boiled to see the knights of other nations overthrown by the Turkish champions, so he joined in the fray, soon disposed of the Turkish chivalry, and killed Godrum, the son-in-law of the Great Turk, who, in his rage, ordered the English boy to be sent to prison, and afterwards to be cast alive to 2 lions who were kept fasting for many days. The day of his death, as appointed being come, and the king, his nobles, and all his ladies seated to behold the execution, the brave Aurelius was immediately drawn forth in his shirt of cambric and drawers of white satin, embroidered with gold, and a crimson cap on his head, but had scarce time to bow respectfully to the ladies, who greatly praised his manly beauty, and began highly to pity his misfortunes ere the lions were let loose, who, at the sight of their prey, casting their eyes upon him, began to roar horridly, insomuch that the spectators trembled, and beheld Aurelius, whom death could not daunt, laying aside all fear as they came fiercely to him. With open mouths he thrust his hands into their throats, and ere they had power to get from his strong arms, he forced out their hearts, and laid them dead at his feet, demanding of the king what other dangerous enterprises they had to put on him, as he would gladly do it for the queen and his country's sake. When immediately the emperor descended from his throne, tenderly embracing him, swearing he was some angel, withal pardoning him, and gave him the beautiful Theosara, his daughter, in marriage, with great riches, who, for his sake, became a Christian. And after spending some time in that place, they both returned to England with great joy, where they lived many years, very loving and happy. I think that this story has all of the wish fulfillment that your basic 18th century barely literate groundling would be looking for. It's about this young boy who's so beautiful he's fighting girls off with a stick, who through no fault of his own reluctantly accepts this call to adventure to go to the far side of the world, where he meets foreign people and kills them in the name of Queen and country, but gets in trouble, but toughs it out in the name of Queen and country, only to be rewarded with a woman-like property. It's basically exactly the same story as the film Kingsman, only it doesn't introduce a secondary female protagonist, only just sideline her towards the end of the film. Also, it spends a good amount of time detailing how smartly he's dressed. Speaking of wish fulfillment stories with a heavy-handed moral element, we have The History of the King and the Cobbler, part the first, where a cobbler is so happy with his job, whistling and singing on the way to work every morning, that the king, while in disguise to spy on his city watch, insists on meeting him. He damages his shoe so he can meet the cobbler, then buys him a drink. The cobbler invites him home, where they go to his cellar and share a brown ale and a Cheshire cheese. The king says the commoner can swing by the court anytime he likes. The commoner turns up, only to realise, oh, that was actually the king rather than just some courtier. He gets terrified and runs away. For running away, he gets arrested. So the king goes into disguise, goes into the cellar, says everything is fine, gives him a pension of 40 marks a year and makes him a full-time courtier. That's what loving your job will get you, kids. I just particularly like how the cobbler is shown as so happy in these two little woodcuts at the end. Look at me, I've got a coat and a stick, way! Now, in a modern reading, there's obviously a lot of homoerotic subtext here, where the cobbler likes the king so much he invites him back to his cellar until his wife wakes up. But taking a closer look at the woodcut down here, things look less than sexy. At least you tried, cobbler buddy, at least you tried. And speaking of probably unintentional homoerotic content, we come to the first part of Friar and Boy, or the young piper's pleasant pastime, containing his witty pranks in relation to his stepmother, whom he fitted for her unkind treatment. This is one that John Ashton has summarised down to just the choice bits, so I'll read it word for word. The father of the boy Jack had married a second time, and Jack's stepmother behaved most harshly to him, and half-starved him. Nay, though his meat and drink was poor, he had not half enough, yet if he seemed to crave for more, his ears she straight did cuff. His father, however, behaved kindly, and to get the lad away, proposed he should look after the cows all day, taking his provision with him. One day an old man came to him and begged for food, on which Jack offered him his dinner, which the old man thankfully took and ate. Indeed, he was so grateful that he told Jack he would give him 3 things, whatever he liked to choose. Jack replied, "The first thing I'd have thee bestow on thee without dispute, pray let it be a cunning bow, with which I birds may shoot." "Well, thou shalt have a bow, my son, I have it here in store. No archer ever yet had one which shot so true before. Take notice well of what I say, such virtues are in this, that wink or look another way, the mark you shall not miss." Jack also asked for a pipe, and the old man said, "A pipe I have for thee, my son, the like was never known, so full of mirth and mickle joy, that whensoever 'tis blown, all living creatures that shall hear the sweet and pleasant sound, they shan't be able to forbear but dance and skip around." The third thing Jack chose was that whenever his stepmother looked crossly at him, she should, against her will, behave in a rude and unseemly manner, which was also granted. The old man left him, and, at evening, Jack took the cattle home, and as he went he tried his pipe with wonderful effect. His cows began to caper then, the bulls and oxen too, and so did 25 men, who came this sight to view. Along the road he piping went, the bulls came dancing after, which was a fit of merriment that caused a deal of laughter. For why a friar in his gown bestride the red cow's back, and so rides dancing through the town after this young wag Jack? He found his father at home, and telling him how he had disposed of his dinner, the good man handed him a capon, at which his mother-in-law frowned, and to her great disgust, her punishment was prompt, and she had to retire. Jack bantering her, she vowed vengeance, and a friar whom she thought a saint came there to lodge that night, to whom she made a sad complaint how Jack had shamed her quite. She said, "For sweet Sir Francis' sake, tomorrow in the field, pray thrash him till his bones you break, no show of comfort yield." The friar went the next morning to give Jack his thrashing, but Jack begged him not to be angry, and he would show him something, so he took his bow and shot a pheasant, which fell in a thorn bush. The friar ran to secure the bird, and when well in the bush, Jack played his pipe, with woeful effect as regards to the friar, who in his involuntary dancing got literally torn to pieces, till he begged Jack, "For good Sir Francis' sake, let me not dancing die." He naturally told his pitiful tale when he reached Jack's father's house, and the father asked him if it were true, and if so, to play the pipe and make them dance. The friar had already experienced the sensation, and the friar he did quake for fear, and wrung his hands withal. He cried, and still his eyes did wipe, "That work kills me almost, yet if you needs must hear the pipe, pray bind me to a post." This was done. The pipe struck up, and everyone began their involuntary dance, to the delight of the father, and the great disgust of the stepmother and the friar, who was almost dead, while others danced their fill. Against the post he banged his head, for he could not stand still. His ragged flesh the rope did tear, and likewise from his crown, with many bangs and bruises there, the blood did trickle down. The lad led them all into the street, where every one joined in the mad scene, until his father asked them to stop. Then the friar summoned him before the proctor, and the gravity of the court was disturbed by Jack playing his pipe at the proctor's request, and all had to dance. Nor would Jack desist until he had a solemn promise that he should go free. Here ends the first part. I think that if I'd been a kid back in the 18th century, this story would have been the shit. I mean, it's got everything. It's got the wicked stepmother, it's got the magic toys, it's got kicking the shit out of a monk on 2 different occasions, and in the end he gets off scot-free. What's not to love? But most importantly, it's got his 3rd wish, which is clearly something rude because John Ashton has just written around it with a mention of behaving in a rude and unseemly manner. Now, I've looked it up, I found a digital copy of the original chapbook. He wishes that whenever she stares upon me so, wishing to keep me under, I wish her bum might then let go a crack like roaring thunder. And when he returns home, then with a scornful, envious eye upon the lad she frowned, with that a cracker she let fly, which seemed to shake the ground. She blushed while they made pleasant sport, the little boy replied, "My mother has a good report you hear from her backside. Sure had it been a cannibal with such a force to fly, it would have beaten down the wall, and also the chimney." She gave another cursed look, then straight her bum did roar, at which the very table shook, and this shamed her more and more. The boy replied, "Dear mother, take a cup before we part, for I am confident you'll break your twatlings with a fart." I'm so glad that John Ashton has been so heavy-handed in his censorship that we know exactly where to look up the rude words in the original texts. I'll be continuing this in a 3rd episode. It'll be exciting, there'll be riddles, and I'll ask you to like and subscribe at the end. Ooh.